I'm going to read from the story that was published in The Common last year. And I'm reading to you from Nairobi. Every day at 4, my grandmother listened to the radio as her enemies died around her one by one. The disembodied voice on the radio shared in her delight, singing on to the next world those who had depended us. Achieng Apisi of Midesa village, daughter of Wilprosa Apisi and Ochieng Japiko, loving wife, mother of 7. Every day the schedule was the same. Breakfast, chores, lunch, chores, death announcements, chores, supper. There'd be a visceral joy to my grandmother's afternoon chore doing, knowing that she'd be by the radio at 4. She'd clean the kitchen, clear the hearth, rearrange the doilies in the sitting room, and do some of the ironing. Then, at 4 on the dot, there she'd be sitting on the floor next to the radio, her eyes closed, her face radiant. Every day without fail, her enemies died. Anyango Nyanyuga from Migori, Olias Jamaranda from Kajulu, Janeko Omondi from Homa Bay, Apio Oliktiga from Kanaan. Throughout the year, her enemies died. Japiko Opio from Kadem, Minanyango and Onyanyango and Anyango herself from Siaya, Apesi Nyarkisumo. She didn't tell us who any of these people were or why she considered them her enemies. When I'd ask her, she'd laugh and ask me if I'd started cooking the ugali yet. Then I'd ask my grandfather, but he'd always been quiet. He'd look at me, then look ahead of him into the neighbor's plots and tell me to go put the water for ugali on the jiko. Even when she started losing her memory, in front of the radio my grandmother sat. Those early days of her memory loss, my grandfather was still around. In the evenings, he'd move silently into the kitchen and then come back into the sitting room. Nyako, he'd ask my grandmother, "This supper, when is it coming?" My grandmother started losing her sense of time and couldn't be trusted to remember anything but when it was 4 o'clock at the dot. She'd sneer at the old man. "Don't tell me what I am. You're choking me. Start supper." My grandfather, did he know how to cook? Those early days of her decline, he'd go to the shop, buy bread, and warm the tea from the morning. Sometimes he'd make ugali, but there are only a certain number of times one can have ugali and eggs, this being the only meal he knew how to make. My grandmother didn't stir from her seat. Then one day, my mother, pitying the old man, sent me to spend my long holidays with my grandparents. This was the December of rain and more rain. You heard it first thing in the morning, loud on the Mabati roof. The roads were deep in mud, the long grass soaking, leaves overhead sending down random showers, even in those moments when there was no actual downpour from the sky, and the clouds looked like clear rain. My grandmother wore a women's ministry kitambao on her head every time she went outside, and tucked her old Nokia inside her brassiere. She didn't care about the breast cancer she'd get from her phone. The list of cares she'd lost, it ran long. Breast cancer, husband's meals, showering every day, going to the Cheerio for the weekly vegetables. She no longer cared about her chores either. So I did them. The cooking and the cleaning and the arranging and the dusting and the mopping and the searching for misplaced sock partners and the running down to the shop for bread and credit and the newspapers. I did them all. I didn't complain. I was one of life's foolish volunteers, prepared for days of motherhood and a marriage and caregiving, taught to be a woman with a hymn in her heart and a prayer on her lips, a woman with aching calves and a strong conscience who found her joy in a cup of strong tea, a woman who, like my mother before me and her mother before her, would sing an extra burden, step forward and suggest, "Try me." Sometimes, in my moments of inactivity, I'd wonder about my grandparents, wonder whether this was how they thought they'd spend the last years of their lives. In their bedroom, there were 2 beds. The one of them ever made me question if it was ever slept on. I wanted to ask my grandfather where he slept, but we weren't one of those families sharing information with each other, telling each other their stories.